Hi, I'm Conor Doyle, president of Oxford Road. You're about to hear a panel that I moderated at this year's Chief Audio Officer Summit called No More Maybes, Scaling Podcast Performance with Precision. CAO is a great summit and the key theme that I keep hearing time and time again is how brands get to hear from brands and really roll the sleeves up and share about what's working for them, what's not working, challenges they're having, how they've overcome certain of those obstacles. So that's really we want to double down on that in this panel. So we have a great cross section of brands that are sharing, a lot, even some secrets that they shared with us for the first time. So this podcasting is really, to demonstrate that podcasting has earned its seat at the table. It's a mass reach medium. So now what? How is it evolving as part of the media mix? How are top brands using it to drive marketing outcomes? I think back to when podcasting started, everything was extremely low tech, but we knew it worked. Flash forward to now, and you'll hear about this in the panel. We're using clean rooms for data housing. Video podcasts are on the rise. Even programmatic is increasing in the space. So one thing that's true with media is it constantly changing, and that's even more the case with podcasting. So I think this panel is a great opportunity to hear the latest solutions from the people that are facing these challenges head on. So I was joined by a very interesting cross section of brands across B2B, a fun fashion brand that started as a D2C company that's now tackling retail, a neobank, which just had a successful IPO, and then everyone's favorite grocery store, Whole Foods. So on the panel is Gladwell Mwangi from Whole Foods, Kezia, previously from Indeed, Megan Smith from Tecovas, Nick Fairbairn from Chime, and we got into all of it. So we touched on measurement realities, creative trade-offs, the video shift, and then even some of the more thornier issues in the space, defining what is a podcast in the age of YouTube and influencer. How do you balance, one of my favorite subjects, how do you balance brand versus performance budgets? Who gets credit? How do you sell that upstream to your executives and really define what media is, doing the pushing and what's doing the pulling? How programmatic fits with host-read storytelling. We all know that podcasting can bring a level of authenticity to your marketing campaign, but how do you balance, just good media buying with more high-impact storytelling? So, I'd say whether you're scaling spend in podcasts or just trying to justify it as a line item, this is a great panel to hear. So I'll see you back here after it's over. So we're going to kick off with just going through a couple questions for each of you individually so we can learn more about your role and your brand and how you approach podcasting. I'll start with Gladwell and Whole Foods. Tell us a little bit about your role.
Thank you for having us, by the way, and good morning. What a beautiful place to be with all of you. Gladwell Mwangi. I lead all things paid media at Whole Foods, which not just includes the audio channel that we are all chief officers of, but everything you can imagine we're paying for, including search, social, etc. We are a brand that, for most of you who are aware of us, need no awareness. We have no awareness problem. So most of our marketing is geared towards consideration and driving new business units and product discovery. I'll stop there.
Excellent. So your brand leads with values, wellness, sustainability, quality, and new product discovery. How do you ensure those values carry through when working with creators at scale?
That's a great question. Because Whole Foods Market is a very purpose-driven brand, in fact, our mission is to nourish people and the planet, and I love that word, nourish. You feel that culture sip into everything. It's very palpable. It is how we define our core values as well. We are a brand that want to grow with purpose. And as customers, I'm sure you felt it as you walked into some of the Whole Foods stores. As an employee, I felt it. Our suppliers feel it as well. We have a win-win model with them. We apply some of those core values and live some of those core values every day. And they help inform how we show up, including how marketing shows up when we're working with those creators, keeping those high standards top of mind, the values about caring for our environment, our community. And so even as we're selecting some of our creators and working with them, we are very deliberate with working with creators who they themselves are ambassadors of some of these values. And can embrace them even as we are building. So it's not just about virality and or a follow account when it comes to some of these creators. It's a very value first approach, and that sips into everything we do.
Interesting fit. And then one thing that's interesting about Whole Foods is you actually have a podcast as well called Beyond the Board. How does this inform your ad strategy? Is it connected at all with paid media? Do you learn from one another? Walk us through that.
Very candidly, it does not. And I don't think it should. Maybe you have a different opinion. It's a new venture. We're all very excited, and I do encourage everyone to listen and give me their opinion separately on what we think about the Beyond the Border podcast. But it's a great storytelling vehicle and one that actually humanizes the brand a lot. It almost narrows or brings down some of the pressure when it comes to the guests we are hosting, for example, people who are leaders and or behind the scenes on creating some of the successes that we have. So really, really a good vehicle, again, to storytell, less media, whereby media is tied to a different ROI, and that's not what this owned medium is for. It's a storytelling vehicle.
Excellent. Feels like the right thing to do. Next, Kezia, tell us a little bit about your role.
Hi, I'm Kezia. I am at Indeed, and so as you all know, Indeed is a two-sided platform. We bring job seekers and employers together. So my team's work heavily focuses on getting employers of all sizes to really post their jobs on Indeed's website. And so we do that work in over a dozen countries across a variety of channels. And so it's fun, and it's obviously like hard work, but we really focus on the employer side.
Excellent. I think podcasting has been one of Indeed's most profitable media channels, from what I hear. What is the primary reason that podcasting has worked so well for Indeed?
Yeah, it's really a lot of reasons. When I think back to like the journey we've been on for 6 years, first off, the channel was just really engaging. And so over that 6 years, we've really seen our target audience really lean in to podcasting as a channel. And unlike some of the other mediums, they expect to hear advertisers. I mean, they know that when we sponsor those shows that they love, we're paying for that show. And so I feel like in this particular medium, they're not always kind of avoiding the advertisement. They're really leaning in. And so I think anytime you have a captive audience, it's always really powerful. I think the second element is really, we've got the right shows in our mix. When I think back to when we started, we might have started with maybe 10 to 12 shows, and they were like really big, broad reach programming, but it didn't really work for us. And so over that 6 years, we really discovered that it was really the small and medium-sized shows that really were really powerful for us. And so when we find a show that works, we're just committed to that show. And so we become part of the kind of landscape of that show, and the people listening get used to hearing us on a regular basis. The other element, I think, is pricing. There have been some shows where we have really great response rates, but unfortunately the CPMs were just too high and we couldn't back into our CPA targets. And so I think, having an agency that's really negotiating and getting great CPMs, I think it's really important. When I look at my other channels, messaging is really important. Oftentimes in TV and video, we've got a really brief window to communicate to our customers, and we can't necessarily explain to them why our product offering and why it's important to post their jobs at Indeed. And I think with the pre-roll and the mid-roll that podcast offers, we just have more time and space to really kind of double click into the relevancy of the product offering and why it's a necessary element as part of their marketing mix. And so I think that's really important. And I guess last but not least is really measurement. I think some people look at podcasting as more branding, but it really is a powerful revenue driver. And I think because we've been able to consistently prove that we can acquire new business customers via podcasts as well as driving incremental revenue, all those things together really helped us to be powerful.
I love that. I love that. The elevated messaging, I think, is so key that you can kind of get beyond the jingle or just the impression with podcasting and really explain, why you exist as a company, and people will remember that if told right. Megan, Tecovas, tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Megan. I'm our Director of Media Strategy at Tecovas. I oversee a lot of our broad reach media channels. So podcast, YouTube, audio, all of that falls in my domain, but really spearheading a full funnel media strategy at Tecovas. And if you're not familiar with Tecovas, we are a Western boot and apparel company headquartered in Austin, Texas. We are the first digitally native boot brand, but we are now a very rapidly growing omni-channel brand in 22 states and almost 50 stores. So very much on the rise and using podcasts to help that growth as well.
Yeah, I mean, very much a lifestyle brand. So curious how you've used podcasts to kind of expand that narrative.
Yeah, so we still sell a lot of boots online, but at this point, we've really expanded on the depth and the breadth of our product and also our brand experience. And that really comes to life in our own brick and mortar retail stores as well. So a key part of our host-read podcast strategy is really that storytelling about our brand experience. We want them to talk about the quality of the product, but we also want them to share about how they stopped into a Tecovas store. They got a free drink, they got a boot shine, they got their boots branded, and really that radical hospitality that is part of our brand identity. And again, as we have that brick and mortar presence, we are expanding into that lifestyle brand positioning and not just selling boots, but selling a brand and welcoming people into the West, as we say. So a bigger vision for us as we move out of our pure D2C roots and continue into this lifestyle direction.
Excellent. Nick, tell us about your role at Chime.
I am newly 2 months into VP of Growth.
Congrats.
I've done this job before, but I went into as a product marketer to help build a team and kind of reinvigorate the roadmap, repackaged Chime up over the last 3 years, and now I jumped back over to sell the stuff that we just created. So we have about a $500 million media portfolio, and we have a huge referral program. So my job is, how do I bring in efficient, smart growth, right? We're the #1 most loved banking app. We have about 8 million users, members, actually. It's a relationship member business. And so it's my job to retain them and bring them in and make sure we have the right quality. So underneath me, I've got the lifecycle teams, I've got the paid and growth teams, the organic teams, et cetera, all that fun stuff.
Nice. And in a space like financial category and banking, Chime, trust is everything, obviously. How has podcasting helped you build credibility while also driving measurable outcomes?
Yeah, good question. Podcast is my favorite. For things like this. And I'm going to go to an aside, don't be mad for a second, and say I was like marketer number 3 or 4 at Dollar Shave Club. And at the time, we worked with Veritone and Oxford One, which was crazy to be here today in this new world. I love it. I'm so excited to be here. But that's how we started building trust. And is this thing real? What is this thing? So you flip into Chime. Yeah, we're a neobank. We're a banking platform. And some of our advantages, we have a radical cost advantage to serve because we don't have such a physical location, right? I think big banks cost them $500 to $600 to serve a customer on an annualized basis. Us, it's about $200. And if you look at the kind of revenue they make on an annualized basis from a customer or a member, it's in the $100 to $200 range. So they're upside down the traditional system, and it's made for the 1%, not for the everyday person. Right, so we are a fee-free banking platform. Trust is huge, but we don't have it, right? And that's the biggest barrier to entry to my brand right now. Because even though people hate branches and don't ever want that experience, it's there, and I know I can yell at someone, and I know my money's there, and it's safe, right? And so that's the biggest barrier. You have Wells Fargo using a Stagecoach because they're 100 years old. So another thing is like the newness of my brand. We're only 12 years old. How do I know that I can trust you? So using podcast like I did back when with you guys to kind of build trust on Dollar Shave Club, it's different, right? Telling the story and being authentic around why you should trust it, what it is, and just being able to kind of story tell the benefits and the trust story are critical.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for that, guys. That was interesting. Now we're going to talk about, I'll just throw some topics out and then we'll see who wants to kind of jump in with an answer, or I'll hit you guys directly. But I think one of the barriers Dan spoke about, and we all know, is measurement in podcasting. So I think, not every brand measures the same, as we know. It has a different media mix, different channels. And so I think we'd love to learn more about that. So how are you approaching podcast measurement today? How do you justify audio's role when it's often undercredited? Kezia, you've been a long-term consistent spender. I think it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think over the last 6 years, it's really been a journey. I think it's important to kind of start off with how we define success. And so for all of our marketing channels, we want to be able to prove that each channel is driving incremental conversions. And so, meaning that the marketing is causing the conversion. And so, ideally, we're doing that with some kind of experimentation and ideally at a very high degree of statistical significance. And so, 6 years ago, when we started, it was actually our finance team. They built an internal attribution model that was capable of measuring TV, terrestrial radio, streaming audio, and podcast. And so we started using that because internally the team trusted that for both TV, terrestrial radio, and streaming audio. And so after maybe a year and a half or so, there was some internal analysis that was done, and essentially the recommendation we were given was that as we moved farther away from the creation of that internal model, internal teams were unsure how confident we were in the results. And so they said, do your best to validate these results over time. And so level 2, I'd call it, was media mix model. And so we had an analytics team that built an internal model. And when they built the internal model, what we learned was that we were underinvested in podcasts. And so it said podcast is actually really great ROI. It should be where our next dollar is spent. And so that was exciting, but still hard to kind of figure out, well, what shows? And so I think even though we knew we should be growing podcast, it was still unclear as to which shows to kind of put those bets in. Over time, the team transitioned from an internal media mix model to an externally bought media mix model. And that model we still use today covered, I think, 5 or 6 countries. And those results also confirmed that podcast was a very efficient channel and also high ROAS, and that we should continue to invest because we were on the kind of the curve we're looking at. There was still a lot of room to spend. And so I think it was really comforting for the team to understand, hey, the internal model is telling us podcast is a great place for your next investment. We've now had 2 different media mix models, internal and external, tell us the same exact thing. And so we felt pretty good overall that podcast was the right place for us to be in addition to the other channels. Now, about 3 years ago, we started leaning into clean room measurement. I'm not quite sure how familiar you all are with clean rooms, but it's basically a third-party private environment where multiple parties can share, join data, run experiments, and keep all of the data private. And so we had been doing clean rooms for most of our TV, connected TV, and display advertising. And so there was this desire to lean in to podcasts and figure out, hey, can we do clean rooms for podcasts? It was kind of like on our wish list, but unclear how to get there. And so I actually wasn't here last year. One of our senior members of our team was here last year, and he happened to sit next to, I think, the founder of Podscribe. And so I think what turned out to maybe a lunch conversation expanded into a relationship over the past year. And we actually used Podscribe to actually measure our podcast campaigns here in the US as well as in Europe. And we found once again that podcast is extremely efficient, high statistical significance. And so I think over the 6 years, it's like every single time we ratchet up the quality of our measurement, it's telling us time and time again that podcast is efficient, it's driving revenue and bringing customers in. And so I think that gives us really great confidence in continue to expand podcasts because we're not lowering the standard at all for this particular channel. If anything, we've raised the bar to pretty much the highest bar possible with clean rooms and really proven that it is a great investment for us.
Super sophisticated, and props to Pete. But I think it shows, a brand that's been in it for a long time, making a strong investment. You're getting that internal buy-in, and resources and brain power from your internal BI teams. I'm curious if you guys have had the same, experience. I know Tecovas is relatively new. Chime's been at it for a few years, but Nick, you have some experience about other brands, and Gladwell with retail. I'm curious, your perspective. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in with that one.
Yeah, you crushed it. You're ahead of the game. Give everyone that playbook. Yeah, look, I'm happy to say we're about to sign our MSA to work with you again. But the reason I bring that up is we're in inning 0 at Chime on how to do this. We're not in inning 0 on how we do attribution and how we're thinking through the world, but candidly, Chime for its first 10 years was a last click model. We spent $600 million to make $800 million in revenue. So that was when VC money was different. And so we're much more sophisticated. And, past 3 years, we've completely fixed that. And I think our budget versus revenue ratio is very, very different. But how I've thought about it in the past is a little bit similar to you, but a little bit more bottoms up. Right? If the DR dollars are easy to be accountable and easy to spend, and this medium, for me at least, the way I've always deployed it, is authentic and endorsed in a story, and it gets, you know, the rabid followers of these different podcasters to go support them. It's an easy way to get signal to kind of sell to the rest of the organization. Look, it's working on a CPA basis, and sometimes you use promo codes and offers, which I hate because you don't want to scale your brand on offers. But like you and I have done it before at different companies of past, start there for your first 3 months to get signal on a category or a show basis from a direct response performance, kind of how you measure TV a little bit. Use the how do you hear about us, use a little Podscribe, use a little bit of direct attribution, use a little bit of your guys' platform, tell a story, and then sort of like move up the funnel. Right, and we got an MMM, a new one, external party called Paramark, is really interesting, and we're chirping it and pulling it down and up. And so while I've proven, you know, $500,000 to $1 million bottom up, I think now I can find another $1 million or $2 million on a monthly basis up here through the MMM, and then I can pull away from some of the DR measurement and feed it in kind of the way you do it. But it's kind of how I got there, bottoms up, proving the organization it's a worthy medium. But in my experience, I've always had podcasting itself in the last 5-10 years. 10 to 15% of my ad spend, which everyone's like, "What? Are you kidding?" When I say this to the organization.
Yeah, when you figure it out, you know, you become a believer, and that's where we get those, you know, those hero people that are like champions of it, and that's where it can work really well. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. Dan, you know, has been going hard on defining a podcast, and so I'm curious, like, how that actually fits into the building. You know, when you guys bring up podcasts, or you see, you know, a show on YouTube, and you have to deal with those internal lines. So Nick, I think you've been you know, in podcasting for over a decade, half a dozen brands. How do you define podcasting in today's landscape? And how is it changing? You know, how is it evolving over time?
Yeah, I mean, it what Dan was saying earlier is so resonant for me, right? Like, now you just assume that the video goes with it, right, on the YouTube side, and you think about how you leverage it. Inside my building, we had a marketing business review yesterday with all of our marketing leadership team, and my brand team's there. We were talking about this. We're using platforms, this new platform called Agentio, which is like YouTube influencers. We're working with YouTube with you guys. We're working with podcast. I'm almost redefining it as endorsement, affiliate / influencer meta, right? Like, not meta, the platform, macro, right? And so it's all starting to converge, and my brand team's like, you shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, chill, I own the budget, and let's be thoughtful together, right? But, you know, I almost think YouTube influencers and podcasters and podcast versus podcast on YouTube, it's all converging. And so candidly, that's how we kind of think about it. It's like endorse / influencer at scale.
Yeah, and we're seeing the affiliate side pop up more and more, particularly from, you know, as social creeps in and video creeps in. Anyone with experience on the affiliate side, and curious how that might you know, evolve into podcasting?
I mean, my affiliate team wants to own it, and I'm like, well, chill. I need you to go do your affiliate job, but it's all converging, right? Because I have the traditional setup. I have an offline / traditional media pod that they do my, you know, TV and streaming and all my audio and my direct mail. But then you've got my digital group over here that does online video, and then I've got my influencer group over here. I'm letting them all play. The affiliates are starting to do the thing with the affiliates, though, it's a little bit more promotional based. So sort of in my brain, it's like that's the promo based kind of affiliate play versus that's how I separate the world.
Interesting. Okay. Another evolving issue, or not issue, but expansion area we're seeing is like the rise in programmatic and brand produced creative. Gladwell, let's start with you on this one. We've done this over the years at HelloFresh, and curious how you think about it at Whole Foods as well. But how do you balance host endorsements with branded assets, and do each play different roles?
Yes, they definitely play a different role. While we have done a lot of both, I have had experience with brands that do a lot more host endorsements than what we experience right now in programmatic for different reasons. I think host endorsements are, of course, more trusted. It's the source of truth for the show, so it's really worked for us. It's actually something that we've been able to test against any other pre-recorded sort of announcer reads, and they tend to perform very well from just a lower funnel perspective. So I can say from just directly seeing that work, it's something that I have pushed more for. But the numbers speak for themselves when it comes to efficiency and programmatic. So it's really hard to ignore that part of it. And so it's a balance mixed where now programmatic with efficiency and that scalability and reach can definitely play a different role. With smaller sort of sized messages, the 5-second, 10-second spots is where we're really leaning into. And those go a long way, especially in streaming when it comes to driving some very quick urgent messaging that perhaps even lives shorter in market as an LTO versus a longer story that can go to that DJ endorsement and or host sort of read, if you will. So from a tactical perspective, there's definitely a variety of ways we've used it, but they all drive down to conversion. And so I think it's just how you apply it.
Yeah, anyone with any, I'm going to throw a flyer at you, but we've sometimes experienced where we might be the agency handling the endorsement side of the business, and then there may be another agency handling the streaming or the spot, and we're seeing those worlds collide. Any experience in dealing with that?
Less so on this programmatic versus endorsement, but to our earlier conversation about just like our creators and influencers team, our media team, and just from our perspective, it's let's bring everyone into the conversation because ultimately we want to work, at least on a host-read perspective, with this talent and what is the right way. I can see like when it starts to get into programmatic and host-read endorsement, it's a whole different ballgame. But I think if you're working with talent in different formats, bringing in the full team and figuring out the best way forward, that's how we've been approaching it. But it does seem a little nuanced when you get into this other world. So.
Well, and 10 seconds, the way she's applying it is genius, right? Like you use a little bit of that frequency bump on top where you go deeper is really smart. For me, the programmatic thing, the big watch out is just don't do what we did for the last 30 years and use the same static spot that's boring and throw it in this medium. Try to leverage the talent relationships, get those live reads cut into produced assets that you can use in programmatic, and they're endemically placed in the types of shows where people would know that personality, or make sure you work the deals that way is sort of how I think about it. I'm nervous about programmatic because you lose the beauty of what we do direct. And so I try to kind of hold on to that.
Yeah, that's a good one. We are seeing a trend, and I do hear from some advertisers that are buying on digital video where they just, especially from a performance standpoint, that they just don't have enough creative. And I think with podcasters now cutting ads in a video format, using cut downs of those ads is a super interesting idea that we're seeing a few brands move into. Along those lines, from a creative standpoint, Nick, I think let's keep rolling with you on this one, and then maybe Megan, because you definitely have a product that people want to see. In terms of cross-platform creative ideas, how do you navigate that internally? How do you work with agencies? I'd just love to hear your guys' perspective on that.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll chime in. We're super excited about the move into video with podcasting. We're a very visual product. We've always excelled with our visual storytelling. So that has been a bit on the podcast side of uncertainty of just this audio only format. It's now evolved very much into a lot of video, and we are one of the brands that capitalize on a lot of that video simulcast buys. One of the ways that we've been leveraging some of the video formats of podcasts is taking a clip and licensing the content and running in paid ads. And we have found that that strategy has been really effective, especially from an upper to mid funnel perspective. Some of those ads are generating 20% plus higher click-through rate engagement than our evergreen paid ads. So there's something about that endorsement storytelling that really draws people in. So we only want to do more of that, of using these great reads from hosts in video format. Hopefully they have their Tecovas on or are showing them, but if not, like just the storytelling in itself and seeing their facial expressions is working in other parts of our funnel, and that's really exciting to see.
Just like UGC is scaled on social for all of us, and it's almost better than our own produced assets. I think of it this way too, but there is tension, right? The brand team's over here making this content. I'm doing this content for this channel. This team's over here doing this content. So it is really tough to make sure we're being orchestrated. And I also don't love matching luggage forced, But how you're applying it is genius, right? So now when we do stuff or do deals, it's let's get the YouTube short 5-second cut down version that we can run in DR. Let's do the 15-second cut down that I can run in different kind of ROS digital platforms with video. So I almost think of it when you do a deal like this as like a mini integrated marketing campaign with each of these personalities, you know?
I love
Conor,
that.
as a challenge for the panel, it's then how does your multiplier give attribution to any of that, you know? So that's the challenge for me right now is where do we attribute that success? And to everyone's question here, what is a podcast?
Yeah,
you know?
these guys in the room might not like it, but I don't give them credit for the other stuff I just said. I give
But he
credit
keeps
to
booking. Keeps booking.
I give him credit for the deal and the assets and the relationship. And when I go throw it on YouTube with DR dollars separately, it's an awesome portion of the deal. But I don't necessarily attribute it back to.
Thank you.
Yeah, just be honest.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. New topic, the balance between brand and performance. This is one of my favorite topics. So we're going to go down the line on this one. Podcasting is a mass reach medium now. You know, we've seen stuff. It's at the forefront of culture. We're looking at rolling a new tagline where culture meets conversion, which I love. How do you treat podcasting, or do you treat it as a performance channel, a brand channel, both? How do you navigate this from a media mix planning or campaign execution perspective? You don't have to answer that exactly, but just curious your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think historically for us, podcasts have been a performance channel. And so we've seen it work really, really well. That being said, even though we're attempting to drive incremental conversions for small, medium business owners, as well as revenue, we also, through the media mix model, measure the impact on enterprise. And so our enterprise is our segment that usually is sales assist, as well as job seekers coming to the platform. And so we see that these SMB campaigns have a positive halo impact on job seekers as well as enterprise. And so although the campaigns aren't measured against that for efficacy, we understand and we appreciate the fact that they have this kind of like halo impact. And so we also measure UAC across job seeker, SMB, as well as enterprise. And for years, we haven't actually had any dedicated brand SMB advertising. But that being said, our UAC has been very high. And so we do attribute that high brand SMB UAC in part to podcasts, as well as some of the other upper funnel channels that we're using. And so our brand team, which is quite separate, and so because we have different budgets and different objectives, we don't have to have trade-offs like some teams do. We both have to kind of hit this mandate and deliver on our numbers. Now, our brand team, generally speaking, tends to focus on paid social and lots of video and TV. And as podcasts got really huge in the US, like over the last 5 years, the brand team has become far more interested in including podcasts as part of their marketing mix. And what I'll say is that their shows are very different to the performance shows. And so, whereas I mentioned earlier, we go after small and medium-sized shows, the brand team tends to go after what most brand teams do, very large, broad-reach shows that tend to have higher CPMs. And because they're backing into some kind of UAC visitation goal versus our revenue goal, they're able to kind of afford those shows. And so I think because the two teams are targeting very different types of content, we don't really see a ton of overlap. I mean, as you all can imagine, there's thousands and thousands of shows out there. And so as long as we keep on communicating, we're able to avoid any overlap. But I think it's been quite nice to actually see the brand team include podcasts, because I've been a firm believer that I thought podcast was actually a great branding channel. And so I think that's really just kind of new grounds. Now, I think for them, they are looking at video podcasts more in addition to audio. But I would say, like in the past, for Indeed, it's really been performance, but really now it's evolving to really being both.
Before we get to Megan, are you keeping that halo a secret from Oxford as well? Just kidding.
Yes.
I think we sit a little more middle of the ground than maybe a lot of the brands here between brand and performance. First of all, as you noted, we're new to the podcast space. We're building our measurement platform and foundation, but we're still very heavily reliant on our direct metrics like post-purchase survey, unique URLs. We're looking at orders, of course, but we're also looking at traffic on those unique URLs. As we move into getting an MMM partner, hopefully next year, we want to look at the larger impact to the business. But the scale of some of the podcast shows that we're on, we're deeply on Joe Rogan. We're on some of the big names out there, and we're using it for scale and brand awareness. And some of the measurement piece, of course, brand is always challenging. We're working to build that out a little bit more. But the scale of podcasts, the engagement, just the level of impressions is also really important for us, with brand awareness being a North Star for Tecovas. So we're a little bit more in the middle. I actually sit on our brand team within our company structure. So it's definitely a little bit more art and science versus just like pure performance metrics for our point of view currently.
And I'll answer like a little more direct around the culture question, right? Because if you treat this just like a DR play, you're going to buy news, talk, political, you're going to buy true crime, right? Everybody knows that's the stuff, there's very performant, active listeners that stuff works, right? So there's always I'm turning it on, let's go to these types. But you zoom out and think of what I'm trying to do with the brand. I'm a young brand. I'm trying to establish myself in different subcultures. I don't want to only be known with middle American women that love true crime. I like true crime too, but you know what I mean? And so I think you can do both. And so we use brand and a little bit of like the mid-funnel brain, to your point, to say, hey, it's really important to us to be in like sneaker culture. It's really important to us to be in X, right? And can we still run it in a performant or mid-funnel way? So we follow culture and brand versus just straight performance and find the middle ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Yeah, I think I agree with everyone. It can be a full funnel sort of tactic. I've worked with brands that purely use it for performance, and yet it still drives brand awareness, conversely. And then I'm working with a brand that only leverages it as a brand play. And we've seen lift across all our brand metrics through maybe a brand lift survey. Consideration is big for us. Again, not necessarily having an awareness problem. So just moving that needle as well is really important, and we've definitely leveraged podcasts to do that.
Cool. Okay, I'm getting the nod, but I do want to ask one question, lightning round. You are the CEO of Podcast Land, everything. You call the shots. What is one rule you would make, Kezia?
Now come to me last.
Okay. Gladwell, let's start with you.
No 5-second spots.
No 5-second spots?
Programmatic.
Okay.
I just don't like it.
Yeah, I would actually just jump off and steal your idea. And not the 5-second, but just say, please don't turn it into old school terrestrial radio and how you monetize the inventory. And please keep it authentic, because that's what makes it special.
Cool. Love it. Megan?
Kind of a different approach for me. I feel like every host on a podcast should have to trade being a host on another podcast and try and speak to that audience in the same way, just to kind of learn how different hosts like generate their own content, speak to their audiences. They're so good at their own lane, but I think it'd be fun to shake it up and be like, okay, you have to try and be Ben Shapiro for the day, and just how that would be. So
I love that. I think it's kind of like my kids are in Little League and they do umpiring, and it's like, get a parent. If you're going to complain about umpiring, you have to go umpire, Kezia, you're the boss.
Yeah, I think for me, because we're looking at so much international growth for podcasts, I would love to have some rule where maybe some of the US-based hosts and shows would either mentor or partner some of the podcasts like creators in Europe and South America, because I think they're so hungry to kind of join the party, but don't always have the infrastructure in their countries. And so some kind of cross-border mentorship thing would be really awesome.
I love that. Cool. Okay, well, we're over time, but thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Media Roundtable. This panel offered insights brand builders and performance marketers can agree on. Podcasting can scale, but it's important to protect what made it work in the first place. And maybe most importantly, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Whether you're in finance, food, jobs, or boots, what matters is clarity and why you're using the medium. So thanks again for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and creator-based media to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. Thanks again to Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Prince, Rob, Neil, Olivia, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.